Good afternoon, and welcome to IMA's Inside Talk webinar series. The title of today's presentation is How to Prepare for a Successful System Implementation, sponsored by Oracle NetSuite. I'm Margaret Lockery, and I'll be your host for today's Inside Talk webinar. It's a pleasure to have Steve Shannon as part of our program, and he will be serving as moderator for today's event. Steve is responsible for identifying, establishing, and growing business and strategic partnerships that are beneficial to the IMA organization and its membership. He also manages the existing partner group, which includes Oracle NetSuite, Deloitte, Certify, Blackline, Anaplan, Sage Intacct, Flowcast, Insperity, Profix, and others who provide valuable business information and professional services to IMA and its members. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Margaret. I'm very happy to be part of today's program, and on behalf of everyone here at IMA, I want to welcome you all to today's session. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today's program. With us today, we have Junaid Somnani. Junaid has over 14 years of experience in guiding public and private companies through finance and operational transformations in order to drive efficiencies. One of his focus areas has been around technology implementation and optimization in order to streamline business processes and enhance the strategic partnership with other functional groups. Junaid has experience across a variety of industries, including retail, energy, healthcare, software, manufacturing, and professional services. Junaid holds a bachelor degree in finance and accounting from DePaul University. Please join me in welcoming Junaid Somnani.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here, and I'm pleased to be able to discuss the important topic today with you and the members.
Thanks, Junaid. I'd also like to introduce our second presenter, Joel France. As a managing director, Joel is responsible for client service. He provides insight on business advisory strategy, specializing in finance and technology enablement offerings, and guiding partnership strategy on finance governance tools. Joel has over 25 years of experience in finance process optimization, finance transformation, and supply chain and logistics. His clients include leading entities in the consumer and industrial products, retail, healthcare, energy, aerospace and defense electronics, and hospitality industries. Joel earned his Bachelor of Science in Finance at the University of Texas at Dallas, and prior to Riveron, he held a number of leadership positions with companies including Texas Instruments, Baxter Healthcare, Coca-Cola, and KPMG. Please join me in welcoming Joel France.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm pleased to be part of today's discussion.
Thanks, Joel. Next, I'd like to introduce our third presenter for today's program, Ben Novak. Ben is a senior manager at Riveron. His 10-plus years of experience in accounting and financial leadership roles include IT implementations, acquisition integrations, process improvement, revenue enhancement, and cost recovery initiatives. Ben has experience with both public and private companies across a variety of industries, including aerospace and defense, transportation and logistics, healthcare, and manufacturing. Ben holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Missouri. Please join me in welcoming Ben Novak.
Thanks, Steve. Pleased to be part of today's presentation.
Thanks, Ben. And finally, I'd like to introduce our fourth featured presenter for today's program, Jacob Wolf. Jacob specializes in assisting clients in accounting, finance, and IT organizations to transform their back-office processes by leveraging technology and incorporating industry best practices. Jacob plays an active role in the Dallas community by volunteering as an operations director for the Project Management Institute, participating in Dallas GLBT Chamber of Commerce, and also he is a member of the IMA in the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. Please join me in welcoming Jacob Wolf.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be here.
Thanks very much, Jacob. So let's take a look at today's learning objectives. After participating in today's webinar, you will be able to describe how to select technology that will solve identified pain points and properly prepare for a successful implementation. You should also be able to use a checklist containing 5 key areas a company should consider and complete prior to implementation, including best practices and key takeaways for each area on the checklist. You will be able to state key challenges that can result from an underprepared implementation plan. And finally, you will recognize proven best practices and considerations as demonstrated through various case studies today. We're looking forward to a very informative presentation, and so at this time I am going to turn it over to Joel to begin. Joel.
Thanks, Steve. Before we get started, I'd like to just kind of give a little bit of background about Riveron. Before we start, we started in 2006 here in Dallas with only 4 employees. Today we've grown to over 350 advisories. Currently we have 8 offices in different markets and looking to add additional locations in the near future. Last year we've helped over 400 clients performing over 800 different projects, various different projects throughout the whole life cycle of business. Those of us presenting today, we're in what is the performance improvement group, helping our clients with projects such as technology enablement, as well as finance optimization, supply chain improvement, operating model advisory, program change management, and performance acceleration. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for being here and listening to us talk about how to prepare for successful implementation. I see that we've arrived at our first poll question, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Steve. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Attendees should see the first polling question now open on your screen. And I'd like to remind all participants that you'll have about 30 seconds to respond to each of our polling questions today. And you can begin responding to each question as soon as it appears on your screen. So our first polling question is, has your organization implemented a system in the last 24 months? Simple yes or no, or C, in process if you're doing so. And again, please note that after selecting your answer, you must click the Submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen just below the response options, so that we can successfully record your answers. Now I'll turn it back over to you, Joel, and let's take a look and see how the audience answered this question.
Well, that's great news. Looks like the majority of people here are either in progress or thinking have done something in the last 24 months. Those people, you'll really enjoy going through this and hearing some of the things that could have helped or will help you in your implementations going forward. Appreciate it. Now I'm going to turn it over to Junaid, and he's going to talk to you for a minute.
So as you can see, based on the poll results, there are many organizations that are always looking to invest to implement new technologies. And a lot of times the investments are driven based on initiatives that organizations trying to face around cost reduction, improving operational efficiencies, drive better controls, or even get better visibility into how they're operating from a business perspective. Due to these significant investments that organizations are making, it is very critical for the organization to ensure that they factor in leading practices and consider what are things that they should avoid from a pitfalls perspective. So here we have an illustration of common challenges. So as you can see from this eye-opening illustration, 68% of all technology projects fail, which is an enormous amount if you kind of think about the number of investments that organizations are making for these type of projects. And of those 68%, 81% fail due to inaccurate requirements, 71% fail due to not having enough resources, and 65% fail due to shifting project objectives. So our goal for the presentation today is going to be able to share ways that you can avoid these major pitfalls. In this presentation, we will be sharing with you a checklist to drive successful implementations. and some leading practices to avoid any of those major, again, traps around technology rollouts. The critical topics that will be covered by our team today will be focused around setting project foundations, characterizing the current state and identifying what the pain points are, developing what we call our high-level business requirements, selecting the right application that fits your business's needs, establishing what is the implementation going to look like and what are the elements of the roadmap that you need to think through. And then lastly, how do you design a good project plan and how do you communicate that within the organization? So with that being said, I'm going to introduce here Ben Novak, who's going to first walk us through establishing the project foundation. Ben.
Thanks, Sinead. The first step in setting the project foundation is to establish a project charter and establish the goals and vision for the project. Your executive team should be very involved, heavily involved in this phase to ensure that their vision is captured and understood by everyone, since they are the ones responsible for the organization. It's also important to understand that system implementations are company-wide transformation projects, meaning they involve a variety of functional departments and are not owned by one specific department. Very often when folks hear about system implementations, they assume that it's an IT-only implementation. In a lot of cases, it's impacting a variety of functions in finance or operations or engineering, and including IT. And all of those representatives should be involved in establishing that project charter and vision. Once the charter is complete, it's important to also establish strong change management. Establishing communication methods, including status meetings and notifications, periodic feedback loops, update boards, etc. They do a really good job of ensuring that your people understand what's in it for them and how they will directly benefit from these type of projects. This will ultimately allow them to get buy-in from their groups and their departments to ensure that the implementation and go live runs smoothly. It's also a good idea to perhaps create some type of FAQ document and update that regularly and share that in locations that are easily accessible to individuals. And finally, it's important to set the expectations for the organization. The expectations work both ways, both what you expect of the participants in the project, but also what they should expect from you. This will require additional effort from your team members, but make sure that they know this up front. All right, looks like we've arrived at our second poll question, so I'm going to turn it back to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So this particular poll question, you can select multiple answers, just to let you know that. And again, you can begin responding to the poll question immediately. You'll have about 30 seconds to respond. So our second question today is, what are or were your organization's goals as part of system implementation? Again, choose multiple ones if you wish from among A, improved operational performance, B, reduced costs, C, improved customer service, D, improved competitive differentiation, E, enhanced reporting capabilities, F, replace unsupported legacy system, G, transitioning from on-premise to cloud, or H, we have not implemented a new system within the last 24 months. And again, after choosing your answers to this question, please be sure to click the Submit button located below the response option so that we can record your answer. So let's take a look, Ben, at the major reasons why, and how does that sort of reflect what you typically see with your client base?
Yeah, this is very indicative of what we see on our client base. Each organization has their own unique goals and objectives in implementing a technology that will be a catalyst to drive improvement and change. So it's not only critical to set these goals at the beginning of the project, but also ensure that they are comprehensive and aligned with executive leadership. This slide is a sample deliverable from a project kickoff. During the kickoff, a number of goals and objectives were identified, discussed, and documented. The team aggregated these goals and reviewed them collectively, consolidated and prioritized each one of these goals, and ultimately settled on a synthesized set of strategic goals that will govern the project. It's important for these goals to be published and revisited throughout the duration of the project. This will ensure that the project remains on task throughout the length of the project, but will also serve as a means to measuring whether the initiative was successful in achieving its required objectives at the end of the project. As Junaid mentioned on the Common Project Challenges slide, 65% of projects struggle with shifting project objectives and unexpected risks. So defining these goals at the beginning of the project and revisiting them throughout the project will go a long way in mitigating this common challenge. Another important step in setting up the project foundation is establishing a core team structure. Normally we see in major engagements, major transformation projects, 3 different types of teams. You have your executive steering committee, those are folks that are responsible for making those major decisions, setting the tone from the top, and providing strategic direction. You have your project management team, your PMO. They're responsible for managing resources, scheduling, the budgeting side of things, and even change management and communications. You can have sub-teams that are specifically dedicated to change management and or training. It's a kind of a best practice or a recommendation for large-scale engagements. And lastly, you have the core project team. Those are the folks that are actually specifically working on different work streams that are covering different process areas or functional teams. Lastly, I'll say here, it's important to designate a lead for each one of these teams, and it's important to keep an updated team roster that includes contact information, general daily availability timeframes, and other pertinent information. Nominating members representing cross-section of key business units, functional areas, and subject matter expertise is also recommended. Just as a key takeaway here, the team you choose will make or break the project. A common thread in successful, efficient, fast-paced implementations is the creation of a strong governance model like the one we have displayed here. This clearly defines the responsibilities of the various teams and walks through the key decision-making process flow. Those are the arrows indicated in red and green. While it is the steering committee's responsibility to make key decisions on the project, it should be noted that all team members should be actively involved in identifying and elevating decision points and risk items to leadership. Quick and decisive identification and action in mitigating these items is integral to the overall success of the project. The governance model should also include team member names and titles, as well as noting required time commitments. This is a very important part of defining your team structure. The PMO team and the core project team members are more often than not full-time or near full-time, and they'll leverage the subject matter experts for functional and technical expertise as needed. But it's also very important for the executive steering committee to stay involved throughout the project, and that time usually equates to about 10%. Clearly documenting these expected time commitments up front will also allow leadership to deconflict resource constraints before they become a reality and begin impacting the timeline and or cost of the project. So by doing so, this will help mitigate another common project challenge discussed previously by Junaid, where over 70% of projects struggle with resource availability and a lack of executive involvement. Lastly, in summary, a formal kickoff is a great way to announce and initiate the project. Make sure at this kickoff, it's important to have the executives discuss the strategic importance of the project. It'll set the tone for all that are involved. The project team should have an adequate, diverse representation, which can be in the form of different functions, business units, and regions. Ensure each member understands their roles in the project and their expected time commitments. Lastly, ensure each team member understands the importance of being a key member of this team. Looks like we've come to our third polling question. I'll turn it back to Steve.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Attendees may respond to this poll question immediately as I read through the question. So our third polling question today is, were new detailed processes defined and optimized as part of the system implementation that you may have done? Answer from among A, yes, detailed processes, and yes, they were optimized. Or B, yes, detailed processes, no, they were not optimized. Or C, no, detailed processes, but yes, they were optimized. Or D, no detailed processes, no, not optimized. I still do the majority of my work in Excel, for instance. Or E, we have not implemented a new system within the last 24 months. Again, after selecting your answer, please be sure to click the Submit button below to ensure that we collect your responses. And so now I'll turn it back over to Ben. Let's take a look at the results. And what are your thoughts there?
So this is great news that, there were so many, 25% that says yes, the processes were detailed out and that the processes were also optimized. That way you're getting the most out of the system and the process of going through a system selection and implementation. The next highest there being, yes, the processes were detailed, but no, they were not optimized. That does not surprise me at all either. It's a lot of times those kind of fall into the lift and shift, if you will, projects where they just take what they have today and they just want to put it in a new system, but they really didn't improve anything. And those are kind of tailing off there. That's great. All right. Let's go on to the next slide. So as Ben went through earlier, we've now identified the vision and the goals. They're clearly defined and the team has been assembled. It's time to document the current processes from both a financial and operational perspective. And that is very important. This is not just a financial implementation, nor is it just an operational implementation. It's for all groups. This is a very important phase for the overall project for the success or failure of it. This will identify areas of concerns that need to be replicated in the new systems, or this is areas that will need to be corrected in the new system. Some of the steps and decision points to be completed in this phase should include some of these steps. And as we go there, step 1, review the current business processes. This is including the whole order-to-cash process, the whole procure-to-pay, fixed assets, payroll, record-to-report, inventory, just every bit of it. Depending if this is an overall ERP implementation, do we cover all of them, or is this a specific technology that addresses one of those areas? Make sure you understand the full process. And again, this is not a financial nor operational. This is a both. Both sides are very important here. The second step is to map out the processes. Again, the order to cash. Every step that goes through it. We're not talking going down to desktop procedure level, but this is those steps and handoffs and activities that are being performed and who's performing them, why are they being performed, and can they be automated going forward. So some of the areas that you want to look at is identify areas that cross-department or handoffs are going on. So if you will, think of your warehouse. Somebody's receiving, they're shipping, making sure that they understand that it's not just a siloed in the warehouse, that it's actually you have procurement involved and you have AP involved. And what is the information that all departments will need going forward? And how do you report off that data, both from a financial and as a process for the company? What is my inventory level? Do I need to order more? Do I have inventory that is growing old? This covers everything. Also, identify information that is required in the next department. This is just as important, So if you're filling out a page in an ERP system and you don't put data in because you don't have time for it, is that causing an issue for somebody in AP? Did you receive it? Did the quantity match? Did the PO match? Did the price match? All that information needs to be followed through and making sure that everybody's getting the information they need also. Is the data structured correctly today to capture all the dimensions that will be required in the future? And dimensions are anything from like departments, product type, SKU level data, legal entity reporting, and we could go on and on. What is that? What are those dimensions that you need to capture in your data so you can do analysis later? And that's either financial analysis, operational analysis. Are there multiple systems or versions of that system today that will be consolidated into one system going forward? Or are you still going to have these multiple systems out there, and how are you going to consolidate that data into your financials and into operational analysis data? Does the data change as it goes along? Are you using a subledger? Are you using some kind of specialized technology? How is that data going to be fed into the system of record that you're looking for? Are there connectors in place, or are you going to still have to do manual journal entries? You also want to identify areas that are working good and that need to be replicated. This is very important. You don't want to take a process that is working very well for the company, it's getting what they need, but then you go into the next technology and that is gone. That's not going to help the company in overall. So make sure that you take the processes that are working very well and that can be replicated in the system that you're looking for. You also want to document areas that cause problems and capture the reasons for those issues. Is it people? Do people not know what they're supposed to be doing? Do they need to be retrained? Is the process broken? Are there too many steps in the process that really need to be brought down into a very streamlined and automated process? Or, kind of on the topic we're talking about today, is the technology. Does the technology not give you the ability to do what you need to do, and it's actually causing issues for your projects? So step 3 is, now that you've captured the current state and you've identified those areas that you're wanting to improve upon, and you have an idea of how that improvement is going to benefit the company, you really now have enough information to finalize that business case. You want to be able to identify what is the return. A lot of times we think of new systems as just an expense to the company, but in reality what you're wanting to implement a new system to do is actually take expenses out of the process. Is there a return on investment? How long is it? This will definitely help get funding from the company, and it helps to know that, hey, we are going towards this, and when Jacob talks about the detailed project plan, we'll want to make sure that those steps are included in that detailed project plan. So as kind of a wrap up to this slide, one of the most common activity that is overlooked in a new system implementation is not performing the current state analysis. As you start to identify new systems, you want to make sure that you identify what you're doing today and what the technology will improve upon. Janae will cover here in a minute system selections, and you want to know what you're looking for. What are you trying to do? Make sure you get that information or you get that capability. The handoffs between departments are usually where processes break down. This really creates gaps in the data. A good indication of this is the amount of time you spend in Excel, matching data sets and filling in data to be able to produce reports. Again, if you put in a new system, you really should be getting rid of Excel. The system should do these things for you. Today, you're probably doing a lot of work in Excel. That is stuff that you want to get away from and get more to the analytics side of the data. So now that you have all this information, you can really finalize that business case and present that to leadership. Now that you've identified your current state, it's time to start identifying the requirements that you're looking for in the next system that you're going to go to. So these are both determined for the short-term necessities and the long-term. It's important to understand what features you're looking for to gain before you have the software demos. This way your demos are not just the sales demo, but rather very detailed demos. You want to make sure that the different vendors showcase these features that are important to you and not the general demo that comes in. You want to define the future state processes. Again, what benefits or functionality will be achieved? Additional reporting capabilities? Automation? Are you going to be able to take activities and tasks out of the process and automate some of the processes? And analytics, are you going to get better analytic capabilities? Are you going to be able to be a part of a business that you in the accounting and finance departments actually are being a business partner by able to do analytics around the data and give them insight into what the data is actually telling you? So then you're wanting to identify what are the current state issues that will be resolved. Are you looking for greater financial or operational information to help drive profitability? Less manual activities, tasks that take place outside the system? Again, Excel. You're going to hear us all say this word a lot. Excel is not a good thing. We need to make sure that our technology is eliminating the need for Excel and you're getting that data from the system. Do you have better data integrity? How many times do you go to a meeting and people from different departments present numbers that don't tie to the financials or even add up? That's where the Excel, anybody can make anything work, but if it's all within the system, the data has to tie, and the data integrity is much better. Now we're going to start looking forward just a little bit. So we've looked at our current state, but now we want to look at what's going to happen in the next 3 or 5 years. What will be the need of the organization in 3 to 5 years? What new requirements may be needed? Are there statutory reporting that may come up? You know, many countries have very specific requirements on how they want that information reported to them. Is your company growing internationally and new accounting standards are going to be required? You know, IFRS, GAAP, local GAAP? Are there industry-specific requirements that you manually perform today, or is there new legislation that will be required of you to supply information to governing bodies? Is your company looking at creating a shared service center where functions will be consolidated and could possibly be at a standalone location or even another country? You also want to make sure that you design a solution that's flexible to grow as the company grows. And then the last one there is, what are the growth plans for the company? Is your company planning on developing new offerings or products that don't fall into the standard product types that you have today? And how will you capture that data in the system that you're looking to implement? Will your company grow by acquisitions? How will you get that information into your system for reporting purposes? Or will you transition them into your technology? And last is to remember from the common challenges that Janae talked about earlier. 81% of technology projects fail because of inaccurate requirements and business analysis. So in closing, you want to make sure that you ensure all functions and user groups are consulted, not only to ensure that you won't miss critical requirements, but also this drives buy-in early on in the process. Requirements aren't just based on the current state, but need to be enabled wherever future state you have designed. I think that leads us into our next polling question. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Attendees may respond to the poll question immediately as I read through the question. And our fourth polling question for today is, how did your organization identify the system to implement? Choose from among A, we used a third-party selection service, or B, I used it in a prior job, C, an internal selection team, D, an upgraded version with the same vendor, E, internet research, F, a competitor on the same platform, or G, you have not implemented a new system within the last 24 months. Again, after selecting your answer, please be sure to click the Submit button to ensure that we can record your response. And so, Junaid, I guess let's take a look at the results and maybe provide some commentary on those selections.
This is great. Well, based on the results, we can see here that there is a lot of effort that organizations are facing, are putting internal teams to take action on the selection process, or they're using kind of the same version and upgrading the process. So this is great. So we're going to walk through kind of our approach. So as you can see, one of the best leading practices that organizations need to do is really work on identifying the right solution that fits their needs, right? Remember, there's no right software that fits every organization. No platform will be able to achieve all requirements. Things vary based on industry or certain things that you're struggling with within your particular organization based on people needs, reporting needs, etc. So as Joel kind of walked through defining what the requirements are, it's very essential to follow a very clear software selection and roadmap exercise. So on this particular chart, you'll see as part of the software selection process, we think about it in 4 major activities. The first activity being solution identification. In this process, we usually recommend that you work with an internal team expert who has gone through an exercise of similar type, or engage a third-party vendor to help identify 2 to 4 solution choices that will work for your organization. Once those tools have been identified, it is highly recommended that you develop what we call as a scorecard, a comparison scorecard, which identifies both the critical elements that are essential from a criteria decisioning perspective and allows the users to be a part of these various demos and illustrations of the software and rank how those things will kind of correlate. This will allow the organization to quantify or have a quantifiable metric to guide the decision making. The next step there is this, which Joel alluded to earlier, is getting custom demos and identifying the custom scripts. So this is where you ensure you map out the most critical elements that you're looking to achieve as part of the technology. And if there are any major integration points, then make sure you call those out as well. And ask the solution vendor to customize your demos. Ask them to see your processes in their environment, in their technology. Even ask them to, feel free to submit your own data sets to them so that you can see your data in their technology with your processes. This will help your teams in identifying if this application is the right application for you. Once the tool has been selected, you have to highly recommend that you work with either your procurement group or a third-party vendor who has negotiated pricing for a similar type of technology project. Key takeaway here is always remember that prices are negotiable. There is nothing that's out there that says that you have to take the price for what it is. Feel free to benchmark against other customers or clients that have actually implemented the technology, and that's where a third-party vendor can assist because they probably have implemented this technology at another client in their prior. Once a tool has been selected, now it's time to shift your focus to the right side here, which is called the implementation road mapping exercise. In this exercise, it starts with, and it's essential to focus on this, developing a software roadmap because there are technologies like ERPs, WMS systems, MRP systems that are cross-functional that require a phased implementation to drive either better adoption, to control cost. So that's why it's very important that you think about road mapping, kind of going through a road mapping exercise. The first thing you need to do is develop a very detailed future state design. As Joel alluded to earlier, it was more defining what the high-level business requirements were. Now that you have a technology selected, it's time to develop the detailed future state processes. As you're designing these processes, you should take into consideration leading practices as it relates to the platform that you've selected. This is, again, where a third-party implementation vendor should come into play and tell you what are the right causes or right application configurations that should drive optimization. And as you develop these processes, ensure you are developing it with the future in mind, the end state in mind, not what we need to do over the next 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. Let's try to think about it from the long-term perspective. After you've developed that future state, it's now time to review some of the risk associated within your organization, whether it be around resources, whether it be around cost, whether it be around timeline needs, or adoption. Once you've assessed those risk elements, it's time to start defining what that roadmap will look like. And once a clear understanding has been pulled together, phase one of the project should be planning now for resources. So within the resource planning phase, you're now identifying both internal and external resources that you're going to need to have as part of the engagement. And number two is ensuring those resources have buy-in, both from the leadership perspective on their time commitments, as kind of Ben alluded to earlier in the conference as well as ensuring that they understand their role and how critical they are in driving success as part of this engagement. This particular slide here is an example of a sample scorecard, an executive summary scorecard, where an organization identified major criteria points and the modules that they were looking to implement. And then within the software, they looked at 4 ERPs with software and implementation costs associated with it, timelines, and how they would fit from a quantifiable kind of parameter around business fit, post-implementation support, user interfaces, ease of integration, hardware needs, and then, again, getting to an overall quantifiable element. So, again, from a Riveron perspective, there's 2 major points here that you should focus in on. Number one, avoid selecting a system just because someone's used it in their past life. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right system for your new organization. The new organization has new requirements, new individuals, new processes. So you have to go through that effort of mapping out the solution that makes the most sense. And number 2, please make sure that you see custom demos from your vendors, because just getting the generic demos will always illustrate what are typically the best parts of that application and not necessarily what you're looking for. Here is an example of a roadmap that we recently created for a client of ours. In this, you'll see this is almost an 18-month transformation, and within there are multiple phases that have been identified. And each one of these phases has been broken out into identifying the resources, the objectives, the vision, as well as a very detailed project plan associated with each one of these elements. Key elements to consider as you're developing that roadmap, again, design the future with the end in mind. And 2, develop a roadmap broken up into phases that allows you to reduce the change management risk and any implementation risk that you might have. I'm going to turn it over to Jacob here to focus more on how to design a thorough implementation plan.
Yeah, so thanks, Junaid. So at this point in the process, we went through the system selection, we went through kind of setting our project foundation, and at this point, we're most likely most likely that the system selection process has concluded and a solution has been selected to be implemented. And so, as such, your focus as a project manager most likely moves to planning for a successful project execution. And so part of planning for a successful execution involves developing a robust and comprehensive project plan. And so today I want to quickly go through about 4 main points that I believe will help you do that. The first of which being is baselining your project, right? So to successfully baseline your project, it's important to keep in mind your project's timeline, the scope, and the budget. These will be the main units of measurement to keep track of the progression and the health of your project throughout its life cycle. And a lot of these documents are collected in prior steps that we have mentioned and usually come over in the charter. And so part of baseline planning might include the allocation of time or budget to specific scope items. Usually these smaller allocations are broken down into what are called work breakdown structures. What they do is they really help identify specific work streams and help project managers realize if there's a deviation from the baseline. And so always keep in mind that project baseline may be revised throughout the project's life cycle. All the time change orders are coming through to increase the project budget, or we're now rethinking that cash flow isn't what was expected in Q1, so you may not have as much money on the services side, or whatever it is, right? So your baseline may always be updated, and you may always have a new forecast to keep track of. So I think the point is the key to proper baselining is to ensure that you have the ability to assess your project's performance. That way your future forecasting becomes more accurate over time. Second, it's important to start your dependency training early, or dependency testing early. So the project management body of knowledge, PMBOK for those of you that are familiar, refers to dependency as a logical relationship. And so a logical relationship has been defined as a dependency between 2 activities or between an activity and a milestone. And this is really important in project planning because what this means for your project plan and what it should account for are any activities that rely on each other. So one example might be that you have a certain task or WBS that must be completed before the next task can begin. So if you're working on a project that has multiple teams involved, right, you want to make sure that each team is finishing their tasks according to the schedule. That way you're not deviating too much from the baseline. And so through thorough dependency testing, you'll be able to identify what that critical path is for your project and plan out the project schedule accordingly so that dependencies are addressed, which also help in identifying and mitigating project risk. Third, and really while on the topic of risk, let's talk about it. And so part of planning for a project is identifying any potential risks or taking into consideration any assumptions that might have came up during previous phases of preparation, the development of your baseline, or even through dependency testing. And so when creating your risk management plan, it's the best practice to assign risks to categories. And then usually you assign 2 to 3 control layers to each of those risks. And so the control layers are methods of mitigating the risk. And so once the risk has been defined and kind of categorized, you layer in these control layers of how you're going to react or be proactive should these risks come up in your project. And so in my experience, it's best to split risks into 4 different categories. I think Ben and Junaid touched on this previously about people, process, technology, and then I add in external events, right? So outside of my organization, there may be something that occurs that totally derails my project or, could be a risk that I want to highlight. So I think it's important to bring that in. And so I think risk categories really help a manager easily analyze risk as well as design control layers in order to most effectively mitigate any of those potential risks. Last and arguably most important, as a project manager, your duty will be to create a staffing plan and or recruit resources to your project. And as Ben mentioned, when you're creating this plan, it's very important to consider the specific needs of the project you're executing on and any expertise that might be required in order to complete a deliverable. So throughout the process of creating that plan, work with the appropriate resource managers. Maybe you've networked throughout your company and created some great connections. This can really help you be able to communicate with them and provide clear requirements and ensure that you have the right talent for your project. And the most important point here being, I think, with the staffing plan is that, any project plan, really, in the execution of the project, it's not going to be worth anything without a reflection of the right resources. So in summary, I think the point is that a project plan will continually be leveraged and revised throughout the project execution. So this is a living, breathing document. This is a living, breathing document that really will live throughout the entire project execution. You can use it for holding people accountable to timeline constraints, budget, facilitating conversation for steering meetings to make sure that the project is heading in the right direction. And then also for any governance streams or communication plans that you've defined. Awesome. I think that's pretty much wraps up what I have for the project management portion of it. So in summary, kind of what we covered today from an end-to-end perspective is first, we went through setting the foundation, really defining what that vision looks like for the project, understanding, how we're going to handle change as the project evolves, what internal resources we might need to get on board, right, as the super users, if you will, to define what type of system we want to select, and then setting the right expectations for leadership, right? Next, we went through analyzing a current state process, figuring out what those pain points are for the organization. What is the accounting team not getting today from a current platform or process that we want to design in something in the future? And then reflecting on what that impact has, as Joel said, to the operations side of the business, because that is very important. And then all of that goes into developing that business case, which then leads into a well-defined budget, right? And so moving on to where we defined and detailed out critical business requirements. So we detailed these out based on the pain points really defined in the analyzation of current processes. Next, we went through software selection. So software selection is solving for those detailed critical business requirements, right? So we're identifying solution providers that best fit our company's needs, and we're rating them on a scorecard to help us make an informed decision. Next, we developed a roadmap. And really what a roadmap helps everybody in your organization do is visualize where are you going to be future state, where do you want to be future state, and then does a phased approach make the most sense in getting the system implemented and getting it implemented correctly. And then last, manage, right? We want to make sure that we hold people accountable throughout this process, that we keep the project moving, and that we facilitate the right cross-functional communication channels so that it can all of this project will be effective and beneficial for everyone in our organization. All right, I think that's about it. Steve, I'll give it back to you for Q&A.
Okay, thanks so much, Jacob. So I'd like to begin addressing some of the questions from our audience members, and let me remind everyone to send us your questions and comments by typing them into the Q&A panel on the left side of your screen. So I'm going to start out with this audience question because it kind of encapsulates a few of the other ones. What does Riveron consider to be the most important component in the vendor system selection process? Is it document business objectives and requirements? Is it being objective in the vendor selection, the shortlist, I suppose, or vendor market share? So again, what do you think is the most important component in that vendor system selection process?
Great question. This is Junaid. I'll take that one. So from my perspective, I think the most critical element is aligning your requirements, the most critical requirements, and seeing the custom demos from various solution providers so that you can actually visualize what the product will look like from an end state perspective, and that you're not you don't have any preconceived notions on what it might be. I think that in itself is the most critical element as part of the selection process.
Okay, thank you. Is it advisable to get one technology partner for sort of an all-in platform or various vendors to cater to your specific tech requirements?
Yeah, I'll take that one. This is Joel. It really depends. There's a lot of software companies that have great solutions that cover a multitude of different industries in different processes. But again, it goes back to what Junaid was saying. You want to make sure that that vendor has what you're looking for. Say you're right now on one of your larger platforms, an Oracle or SAP or something. They have a lot of different platforms. Your NetSuites have a lot of different platforms. but is it the right platform for what you're doing? Do you have, is what you're doing so industry specific that a broad solution is not going to cover off on it? But again, most of your big providers have those industry silos, if you will. They have those already built out, and they've actually captured a lot of the requirements. So again, it's every company is different, and you really have to identify what is it that you're trying to achieve, and can they deliver that for you.
Okay, thanks. How do you handle conflicting points of view from a goal-setting perspective, I guess, as the process begins? How do you handle conflicting points of view?
This is Ben. I'll take that. That's a very common occurrence in projects, just given that project teams ideally are comprised of a diverse set of individuals that may have their own responsibilities and different functions across their organization. I think the first thing to do is be open-minded and have very honest discussions with those individuals that have suggested those goals to get a really good understanding of why they believe that goal is important. If those goals have some type of quantifiable metric or KPI, any type of key performance indicator, it could be useful in understanding the numeric or quantifiable impact of achieving or not achieving that goal, and that can really help you deconflict or understand which goal is a bigger priority or is more important. But ultimately, you should be leaning on your strong project governance model to escalate these type of conflicts, these goal discussions to senior leadership so that they can provide their top-down perspective and overall steering committee guidance to make the right decision.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned, during the presentation, it's helpful to envision what you want to gain out of a new implementation project. Do you also recommend looking at the team that you're building or other factors in sort of a pre-mortem, like seeing where there might be a weak link prior to really going forward full bore with the implementation?
Yeah, I think it's obviously, the team members are one of the most critical parts of an engagement, of an implementation. You have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals within your organization. You need a proper mix of doers and theorizers. If you have a bunch of people that are idea guys and gals that don't actually execute or implement, you're not really going to get anywhere. And conversely, if you don't have people that have kind of that holistic view, you might miss things. So you need to evaluate your team. Every organization, much like selecting a system, every organization's team may be different based off the resources that are available to them. But you definitely need to take a good hard look at evaluating the resources and the capabilities of the team.
Okay, thanks so much. We have a few more questions, but I'm afraid we're right at the top of the hour, so I'll turn it back over to Margaret now.
Thank you, Steve. At this time, I'd like to thank our presenters, Junaid Samnani, Joel Frantz, Ben Novak, and Jacob Wolf, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative that they've made time for IMA and for our audience today. And also, thank you, Steve Shannon, for moderating today's event. I want to again thank Oracle NetSuite for sponsoring today's webinar, and thank all of you for your participation in today's event, your commitment to IMA, and your professional development through IMA's Insight Talk webinar series. I look forward to spending time with you again soon when we'll enjoy some more Insight Talk.